The host known as the Wild of this prime now knew of an entity that was not of the prime, stealing the souls and life of others, and making their own twisted demonic forms of such. It reasoned that it was a demonic incursion, and took steps to warn other hosts of this. However, a host that is in place upon a world is not party to information another host gifts them to from on high, so he needed to force a way for the other hosts whose presence was focused upon this world to become aware of the problem before it became too much for them to combat. And so it closed itself off to the world for a time while it tried to find an answer. The druid's influence upon the realm dwindled for a time, and the numbers stagnated. Eventually the answer was divined, and came in a form that his daemon would eventually use to get its own wishes heard. An ascension was needed. A rise to the host would allow all to hear the pleas and react accordingly within their paths. Yes, this would work, it had to work, or else the prime would fall to the ravages of a daemon kind of nature hitherto unknown. And so both sides began their plans to force an ascension, but neither side knew the intent of the other, and so continually worked against them where they were discovered. Perhaps had the Wild been privy to the fact of the demon's origins, or more precisely, the fact that it was in fact a host itself, things would have gone much faster, and with far less bloodshed, at least for their own kind. And so, as the time drew upon all, a great surge was felt around the primes, as a new god seemed to arrive, going by many differing names. But that would not matter, for Ashan was the first it chose to take under its new identity as a god, so he would continue as though all knew it as such, for the sake of ease of understanding. From the time of Ashan being established with Kotel and others firmly under the power's control, it took almost a millennia to craft and realize his machinations, and to finally have enough power and hidden forces to push forth and force an ascension. As he engineered the downfall of many high priests and the subsequent collapse of their faiths in regions across the prime, he waited and coerced others into aiding in their demise. This was working, and working well indeed. He became aware, however, of demonic planes working their way toward the prime, eager to feast with such tender targets, although some, he suspected, were there to bear witness and understand this great plan further. Some of these unfortunate denizens soon became one with him, and he learned through several of their minions and the eventual absorption of one of their overlords that there was some form of leadership amongst the grouping, and that some had banded together in an uneasy truce, but to what end he could not discover. It did not, however, stop him trying, by destroying all that would not answer his thirst for knowledge. The demonic group had become allies through necessities, as their own planes had been destroyed, but they had been able to escape from the grip of this entity that consumed all. They observed through allies their demise and the twisted shades he created, and understood they could not fight this war and win, and to this end had only one hope for survival: to enter a prime together and try and salvage their power and identities alongside the mortals of that realm. Their dethroned demonic husks would become brittle and fall to the void as they blended their threads with that of the prime, and they would become something new, something unique among their kind, at least as far as they knew. They would no longer be overlords of their own planes, crafted from their own essences and sheer power, but instead become daemons of the prime. They managed to break through the planes that surrounded one realm, one single prime, and discovered that their nature was unknown to this place. This place had a shard of the Wild here, and they could sense it, but although it was extremely powerful, it seemed to be encircled and held within an area they would come to know as Lassashar. They travelled for many months on the winds and currents of magic, and eventually settled on a place for their new beginnings. It was a seemingly empty place. Nothing more than plants and small animals could be seen at first glance. But as it turned out, it was full of creatures far more deadly than he had witnessed on other primes. This place they named as Dominia, and it would be their new place of power, their own unified domain upon the prime. And so they enacted rites and rituals and bound their essences to this place, this land, and in doing so, severed their tethers to the planar energies they had survived on for untold aeons. They attuned to the realm's own magical energies and began to leech what they needed from it, discovering that magic upon the primes was not as it was upon the planes. Here it was structured, and followed rules set out by the ebb and flow between the elemental planes as well as the void itself, it seemed. They discovered that links could be made to the elemental planes easily, for them at least, and that they could pull magic from these places too, allowing for a vast magical store to be built up within their forms. But as they soon discovered, it was not as simple as it had been upon their own planes. On their planes, their realms, all of it was them. No matter if it were rock, a hill, a minion, or their own lashing energies, it was all essentially one essence, one mind of one purpose. Here, it was not the same. They had to create a form that was solid and reflected this realm. They needed to craft bodies that would endure aging as well as the ravages of the environment, but also they needed to find materials to create such, as they could not create a lasting material themselves, for the magic slowly seeped away or overloaded the object, causing it to become one with the magic flowing around the realm. They reached out into the world and travelled to discover possible answers to their plight, and found life that pulled minute threads from the closest demonic planes. In comparison, it was like a tap from a well was to a raging ocean's waves crashing upon a shore. But still, they were indeed using such magic. They discovered what would be known as demonologists, and they marvelled at the ability to craft, manipulate and imbue themselves with demonic energies, and began studying them. In time, their presence was sensed by the greater of their number, and they were approached with the offer of a pact. Now they knew all about pacts, and how they were often used to gain the soul of the unwitting, in exchange for an infinitesimally small portion of power to sate their mortal hunger. But they had demands of their own first. It was not long before information was gleaned, and small pacts were entered into, and they learned of the materials of the realm, and what was used by who, and for what purpose. They discovered that some materials were deemed to be gifts from the host themselves, and they were sought after by corresponding followers of such gods. Perhaps these materials would suit their purpose. They sought samples of as many as they could, but discovered that very little existed upon this place, outside of where the wild lay, and so they began using their knowledge to instead begin infusing their own realm, Dominia, with their own magic, and then crafting new bodies from these materials. The first created was only a partial success, as they missed essential rituals and rushed the process as their power slowly waned. However, the second attempt was perfect, and so the first of their number was placed within it, but still it was found to be losing power. This option would prolong their existence upon this prime, but it was not a permanent solution. It was then they were introduced to one known as Zorma. This hulking creature, they called an ogre, was adept at the manipulation of demonic energies, and surprised them with his prowess and mastery, such as it was, with the smallest of their threads. He said he knew of a way, but it would mean giving up their very nature to the prime in order to accomplish this, and they agreed. Zorma told them of the process and what was needed, and they obtained everything. The hardest part was gaining a sliver of a host, what Zorma called a spark of the true lights. However, as it turned out, these lights, although uncommon if not rare upon many primes, were plentiful upon this one, and so they captured a priest with a spark of pure divinity, or rather told them of their plight, and they agreed to aid them for insight into their old planes. And so the first recorded essence crystal was to be crafted, and it was a huge undertaking.